From MTN, the Montana Television Network, this is Face the State.
It's Sunday morning and welcome to Face the State. And I'm Dave Parker, MTN political analyst, as always joined by Chief Political Reporter Mike Dennison. Wow, last Tuesday, election came, it's gone, it went, and what an election day it was. It looks like we broke the midterm election turnout, at least we had the highest turnout in the midterm election since at least 1990. We had about 70% of Montana's registered voters show up and vote on election day. And we had a Senate race where Jon Tester survived despite 4 presidential visits. Kathleen Williams came up a little bit short. To understand why the Senate elections turned out the way they did, to understand what happened in the House race, we are joined by Eric Stern, former counselor to Governors Bullock and Schweitzer, and Democratic consultant, and Jake Eaton, Republican political consultant, who also was a staff member for Congressman Denny Rieberg. Gentlemen, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.
So, what happened? Let's start with the Senate race. Why did Tester win, and why did Rosendale lose?
Go ahead.
Tester won because he got some Trump voters to vote for him, which is why Democrats win in this state generally. You need some Republican voters in order to become a Democratic elected official because it's still a Republican state. This electorate was still about 10 or 12 points conservative. It wasn't a Democratic electorate. It was a Republican electorate, but Tester did a good job getting out his people and then got some of those independents who are people who will vote Republican for president and will also vote for Democrats for statewide office.
Yeah, I think Montana definitely has a lot of split ticket voters, and this election I think is a great example of what that electorate looks like. And I think the bottom line for Tester was able to make this a race about personality and less a race about issues. And he has, kind of the bigger, better personality, and that was able to overcome the fact that he's on a different side of a lot of issues than a lot of Montanans.
Hey, you mentioned, okay, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and on the Trump factor, I don't know that he really helped him. I don't know that he helped Rosendale. It may have been a wash. He got out a lot of Republicans, but he also got out a lot of young liberal voters, particularly in places like Missoula and Gallatin County.
Hey, you read my mind. That's the question I was going to ask, is that we had the president coming 4 times, and his son, and the vice president, to drive Republican turnout, which I think it probably did, but I'm also wondering how much did that drive oppositional turnout?
I think his son showing up with his, arm candy from Fox News and his private jet, that doesn't do anything for anybody. It probably hurt Rosendale. And I think the president probably ended up neither helping nor hurting either side. I think it ended up being a complete wash. I really do.
Jake, what do you think about the president?
I think it was a big help. I think there was no question, just from a historical perspective, there's always more enthusiasm from the opposition party. The party out of power in the White House always has an enthusiasm advantage coming into that first midterm election. And I think had it not been for the president's involvement in Montana and the Kavanaugh hearings and a couple of other things on the Republican side, I think Democrats could have made huge gains because of an enthusiasm gap. So I think the president being out here and putting so much time and energy into Montana really put forward a lot of Republican voters, and the Democrats were going to show up anyway.
Let me flip that around a little bit. Are you telling me that if Donald Trump didn't show up, if he hadn't come here 4 times, it might have meant that Jon Tester would have won by a bigger margin? Is that potential?
Absolutely. I think Republicans would have had a lot of turnout issues in Montana and elsewhere throughout the country if it hadn't been for the president's involvement and if it hadn't been for the Kavanaugh hearings. I think the Kavanaugh hearings were really kind of the game changer in where this election broke, and Republicans woke up and were like, whoa, we really have to get involved. This can't be a typical first-term presidential midterm election.
I do know that if you looked at some of the candidates' internal polling, the Kavanaugh hearings actually caused things to go sour for a while, and it didn't look good for Democrats.
So what brought it back?
Well, I think time brings it back, and other things. And once again, it became more about the president than about Kavanaugh. But I have to say, if you look at, let's remember what this election really was about. It was about turnout in places like Missoula and Gallatin and Cascade, and those are places where Democrats have more vote than Republicans. If you look at the rural East, you look at Weebaugh or Wheatland counties, places in rural Montana, their increase between 2014, the last time we had a midterm, and this election was very minor. But in places like Gallatin and Missoula, it was 30, 35, 40%. So that really, there's not a lot more vote to get from Rosendale country than there is from Tester country. And Tester got a big increase, and Rosendale just wasn't able to get it.
I think some of that is also just shifting demographics, and you're also talking about 3 of the fastest growing counties in the state of Montana. So there's just physically more people voting there on both sides now.
Now, speaking of turnout, of course, the turnout we had in this election, 70% turnout, just stunningly high for a midterm election.
Remarkable.
Yeah, that's the highest we've had since, 1994? I mean,
We're going to surpass 94, basically since 1990.
yeah, so it's one of the highest we've ever had in a midterm election. And of course, I think that probably helped the Democrats. If not, you can disagree with me, but my question is this. If it helped Democrats, if it helped Tester, if it helped Kathleen Williams, even though she still lost, why didn't it help down ballot Democrats? We had, the clerk of the Supreme Court, Democrat, gets beat pretty handily. Public Service Commission, Republicans just hammer away on the Democrats. Legislature, we have the Democrats gaining 1 or 2 seats statewide. How come that big turnout isn't helping these other Democrats?
I think because of to go back to what I said, the reason John Tester was, really one of the only successful Democrats in Montana is because it was a race of personality. And it wasn't some big, giant blue wave. And I think if you use 2010 by contrast, in that first Obama term, Republicans were winning everything everywhere. And it didn't matter who the Republican was or where they were winning. In Montana, we didn't have that this time. What we had was John Tester was successful because he ran a personality race and he ran a much better campaign than Matt Rosendale did.
And again, I'll say what I said before. It was not a blue electorate that came out. Those 495,000 voters were conservative to the right 10 points. And so in legislative races, that matters a lot more than in a race that's a statewide race where everybody knows the names of the candidates and they've been following it.
And so what you're saying, like you mentioned legislative races, where I think a lot of the candidates aren't that well known, and also this clerk of the Supreme Court where they're not known at all.
That's the race. That's why I say it was 10 points conservative.
Right.
So you look at that race,
Right.
which are really 2 names that don't mean much to anybody,
Right.
and they vote the party, and it was about a 12-point spread, I think. Or
Yeah,
10,
something
10,
like that, yeah.
Well, let's look at what Matt Rosendale did right. I mean, let's go back to the 2012 election. One thing that was clear, and is, I think you and I maybe disagree a little bit on Jake, but the Dan Cox issue, right? I mean, he got 6.6, 6.7% of the vote. Matt Rosendale kept that at about 2.9 statewide. You look at rural areas, well, John Tester kind of held his own. Matt Rosendale was moving up the score a little bit in those rural areas. He did some right things, yes.
Oh, definitely, he did. And I think to just go back to Libertarian for a second, the other thing that you had is you didn't have Democrats spending over $1 million promoting the Libertarian candidate in this race like you had in 2012 either. So that definitely, I think, has an influence on that overall Libertarian vote.
Turns out they didn't need to.
So what is it about that 9% of Republicans, at least according to the exit poll data, that voted for John Tester, which is about the same amount, a little bit more, maybe 11 that voted for John Tester in 2012. What is it about those 9%? How do you grab them back?
Well, I don't know that they are Republicans. Like I said, Montanans are notoriously split ticket voters. I mean, whether it's this election, you look at the vote totals for Greg Gianforte and the vote totals for John Tester, whether you look at 16 and you look at how the president performed here, and then you look at how Governor Bullock was able to win and how Congressman Zinke was able to win. I don't think those people are really Republican voters per se. I think they're conservative-leaning independents that are not afraid to split tickets.
Now, if I'm a Democrat, or let's first, if I'm a Democrat and I'm looking at the results and I'm thinking ahead to 2020 in Montana, what sort of lessons should I pull from these and say, okay, here's where I have succeeded and can succeed more?
Invest in a ground operation. And go get those votes. Go get people that are Democrats to come to the polls. It worked for Tester this time. He had hundreds of paid staff in the state, and they were literally going out and getting voters to cast their vote. And that's what a field operation is. And for whatever reason, Republicans generally don't do it quite the way Democrats do. But one reason is that a lot of their people just tend to vote anyway, and we have to basically nudge ours a little bit harder. But it worked. It really did.
I guess a similar question for you, Jake. If you're a Republican and you look at the results and up and down the ticket, what do you see there is good things for you looking ahead, or things that you need to work on, and what are those things?
Well, I think, very similar to what Eric said, I think you've got to focus on, how can you perform a little, just marginally better in, just a handful of counties? How can you pick up 2% more in Missoula County? How can you pick up a couple % more in Gallatin County? How can I do a little bit better in Great Falls? Whether that's through issues, whether that's through personality or whether that's through ground game, I think that's the key to successful Republicans.
And also make sure your Republican opponent, is a wealthy guy from either the East or the West Coast.
Well, if you unpack the data a little bit further, and this is where I think as a Republican I might be concerned. You look at the exit poll data, 18 to 29 here in Montana. You go back to 2012, Rehberg actually only lost younger voters by like 7 or 8 points according to the exit poll. Yesterday, John Tester almost won young voters by 40 points. We know that younger voters didn't like Hillary, didn't really like Trump. How do you fix that for younger voters?
Well, for starters, I don't put a lot of stock in exit polls because
Okay.
if we looked at exit polls, then Hillary Clinton would be president.
Trump's job approval among young voters is 26%.
And Democrats would have won every race ever in the history of the world.
But
So
you would
I
concede the
start
point
from there.
that younger voters probably lean a bit
But
Democratic.
I think that's been true since the history of time. I think younger voters skew.
It's never been like this.
liberal.
It has never been
And,
like this.
in the 10 election cycles that I've been involved in, somebody says every time, oh, these younger voters have never been engaged with, the liberal causes or issues like they are today. It just doesn't hold up. It changes, every single election cycle. So.
Okay, well,
I guess that is,
maybe
I
you're
have a
saying
hard
it's not
time with that
fixable.
premise. Yeah.
How do you keep it then, Eric? How do you keep the fact that
You have the
Democrats winning?
Republicans nationally and pretty much everywhere keep acting like they are acting, because whatever they're selling, young people aren't buying it. That's it. I mean, and then you provide the alternative.
Now we talked a lot about of course, the Senate race was the big race, all the money, $60 million. The House race, we have Gianforte winning by, what was it, 6 points or so?
About 5, 6 points, yeah.
6 points. And one thing I noticed, and I want to ask you both about this, is that in the counties where, the Democratic counties where Tester did really well, she didn't match that total. She kind of underperformed Tester in a lot of places. And what's going on there? I mean, if I'm voting for John Tester and I'm a Democrat, why would I just go vote for Kathleen Williams?
Sometimes these eggs are hard to unscramble. I don't necessarily have a great theory, but you could also look at it the other way, which is that House seat traditionally is extremely unlikely to go Democratic, and she pretty much pushed it about as far as anybody can. I mean, she did better than anybody in 20 years. That number is at 47%. That's better than anybody's done actually in the history of that House seat, since it's been 1 seat as opposed to 2. So I thought, all in all, I think it was pretty impressive.
Well, Pat Williams had it when it was first into 1 seat.
Did he run? Did he run?
Yeah.
For once? So that was the last time somebody did. Since then, she's
1994.
better since then. So it's meant a
Well,
long
then-
time.
Keenan ran a nail biter in 2000.
No, Williams beat Keenan's number.
In terms of percentage or in terms
Percentage.
of? I didn't know that. That was a pretty close race. I think it's a lot of things. I think, to start with, the Gianforte folks ran, a very textbook campaign. They did a good job at the blocking and tackling and the things that you have to do to be successful in a statewide campaign. So I think that was a big part of it. I think Kathleen Williams, just from a technical perspective, made a lot of missteps along the way. They came up on TV late. They had, kind of this discoherent message that was, really more geared towards a primary audience, I think, than the general election audience.
Yeah, and she's a rookie candidate, really.
Yeah.
I mean, for a statewide election.
And I think she made a lot of the rookie candidate mistakes. And the Gianforte folks didn't. That's a pretty solid crew that's been through some pretty tough elections.
She ran a campaign that's more like the ones you saw back long ago when Democrats used to struggle statewide in this state on federal races. This was about Social Security and Medicare, and I'm not sure that those issues really resonate in a way that you need to be able to beat somebody like Gianforte.
Did the Democrats need a different candidate, Eric, to beat Greg Gianforte? Did they need to choose someone other than Kathleen Williams? Can you envision a candidate?
I don't think any of the other people in the primary would have done. I don't have any reason to believe that they would have done better than she.
So at this point, should the Democratic strategy be basically just cede the seat to Greg Gianforte? He can be congressman for as long as he
I
wants.
like that idea.
No. No. I think that no.
You're suggesting he's not beatable.
No, I think that House is it's in the absolute perfect ideal circumstances with the absolute best Democratic candidate you could ever put forward. I think you could still not. I think you could take that seat.
We had all the other pieces.
She was good. She didn't do everything right. She made mistakes, and it's tough. She's a first-time candidate. She was not a known person. Gianforte, people know who he is for better or for worse.
Do you think moving forward, looking at 2020, given what we have here, and we talk about this a couple different ways. You sort of got there a little bit, Mike, but we have Steve Daines on the ballot in 2020. Is there any reason to believe that Steve Daines is vulnerable, that given what we've seen in this election, is there anything that suggests that a Democrat could beat him in 2020? We'll start with Jake and then we'll go to Eric.
I certainly don't believe so.
Why?
Because I think the vulnerabilities that they've been able to, that Democrats have been able to exploit against Republican candidates starts with, are you from here? And that's the end of the list. And they've kind of made, their two successful races, in 2016 against Greg Gianforte and this year against Matt Rosendale, like it's kind of the beginning and the end. And Steve Daines doesn't have that problem. So unless they can come up with some new recipe on how to be successful, they don't have that issue.
I think, by the way, he was born in California, so technically, on some technical level.
So was Gianforte.
But I think, by the way, there is some truth to what Jake is saying. Democrats have come to rely too heavily on what is effectively a nativist argument, which is exactly the kind of thing that Democrats don't like to hear nationally about people coming into the country, but they're happy to use about people coming into the state. So I think they have to find something a little better. They've relied too heavily on that. But I do think Daines is beatable. I do think he is. His numbers, his job approval is very low, and that's the thing that you look at to figure out whether somebody is beatable.
So what are the issues that Democratic candidates that are running statewide can exploit? I mean, we heard a lot of talk about, I think the public lands thing has kind of run its course, maybe I'm wrong. And healthcare is a winning issue, but beyond that, what?
The national debt, the rights of workers, a fair tax code, and as you said, healthcare, affordable healthcare.
Now, Jake, if you're a Republican candidate, how do you if someone's running against you with those things, and you're saying, oh, well, right? No.
We're right on all those issues. I mean, Obamacare has been, probably one of the biggest disasters in the history of the country, and people are paying more for health insurance now than they ever have before. And that's all Obamacare. That's a 100%.
They are paying more than ever. I mean, people who are getting subsidies are paying more than ever before.
Maybe not the people that are getting subsidies, but everybody else is paying more
to
pay for those things. So I don't think Democrats have winning solutions on those issues. Their solution to all those issues just seems to be give more free stuff to more people. And you can look. That didn't even work down in Florida. Kind of the Bernie Sanders model of this extreme left, it isn't winning a lot of races. But I think that's their problem. And I think if you look at this congressional race, it is a perfect example. They didn't have the ability to say, Kathleen Williams is a fifth-generation Montanan and Greg Gianforte is not from here. And they lost because that has literally been the only issue propping them up in these competitive elections.
Let me ask a slightly different question, Jake, that I think you might have some interesting insight on, and that's Denny Rehberg and Greg Gianforte on this level. When Denny Rehberg won his first race and he went to Congress in 2001, he was in the majority. And then, of course, the majority was lost in 2006, and then he continued to serve in Congress. How was that experience, do you think, for Denny, shifting from the majority to the minority? How did he deal with that? And then what's the advice you might give to Greg Gianforte? Because he's been in the majority, it's been kind of cool, but now he's going to be in the minority, and that kind of sucks.
Well, it's certainly a lot more fun to be in the majority. But being in the minority, as we saw in this election with Democrats, presents a lot of opportunities from a political standpoint. Because, I think people respect the fact if you can offer real alternative solutions to what it is that's going on. Whether or not you're able to enact those solutions, I think as long as you can provide people with a viable alternative, I think people will respond to that. And I think that's something that Congressman Gianforte has to continue to do is he has to say, look, we're not going to be able to get as much accomplished as we would have been with Republican control of Congress, but certainly that doesn't mean that we're just going to sit back and start calling everybody names. You know, we're going to go out and actually still continue to put forward real solutions to problems.
Eric, let's flip that around. Greg Gianforte ran a business, was CEO, created jobs, probably didn't want to go to Congress. Do you think him being a minority in Congress might mean he's going to look for a different job?
Yeah, I do actually. I doubt that he's going to have much fun being in the minority in Congress. I mean, he was a CEO of a 600-person company. He wanted to be governor, and I think he's probably going to tire pretty quickly of that. And I don't know that anybody can really blame him. I mean, being in the House, you're one of 435 people, and it's not the same as being an executive. So probably. But you know what he's going to fight for in the House is to continue to cut taxes for the wealthiest Americans. That is what Trump said he wants Republicans to be doing in Congress. It is what Gianforte did once already, and he'll probably try to do it again. And I do think that his having been involved in the tax cuts, which disproportionately benefited very wealthy Americans, was one of the reasons that Kathleen Williams came sort of close to beating him.
Let's talk a little bit about the big initiatives on the ballot. First, I-185, which was the one to extend Medicaid expansion, along with the substantial tobacco tax increases, which precipitated $17 million being spent against it by two tobacco companies. Eric, I'm wondering, do you think this was a political miscalculation by primarily Democrats and people who supported that to take this to the ballot with that tobacco tax on it? We had 3 other Medicaid initiatives around the country that passed that were just expand Medicaid. This one, a little different, and didn't pass. What do you think?
No, I think a couple of things. First of all, the cigarette companies spent $20 million to defeat this thing. Mm-hmm. The Montana hospitals put in about $6 or $7 million, but they were still they're still heavily outspent. The campaign that the cigarette companies ran was actually a very good one. They made very good ads. The hospitals sort of had never done something like this, so they were funding something new. There were some mistakes made, but I think in the end, it was actually closer than a lot of people thought. And it was ultimately the tobacco company money that defeated this thing. That's just the reality.
But that's my question, though. If you take that out and just say, okay, I'm just going to do a ballot measure that just expands Medicaid, why not that?
Well, other wealthy interests might have come in and tried to defeat that, and those things have passed in some places, they have failed in other places, and they're always very tight, so there's no guarantee that that would have passed either.
I'm also curious from your perspective, Jake, on I-185, do you think it really, did it affect any other races? Did it help any party or any person, or was it just kind of out there as a thing that was voted on?
I don't think so. I mean, I think you did kind of see kind of some partisan lines in this initiative more so than, say, the mining initiative, because of the principles that were behind it. Tax increases and more government spending, generally things that Democrats favor and Republicans are opposed to. So I think just from that starting place, but I think it was a huge miscalculation to put this tobacco tax and the Medicaid expansion together. But they had to do it. They had no other alternative. I mean, all the data that I have seen shows, just a permanent extension of Medicaid on its own would have failed. And so they needed a boogeyman to create in order to even out the playing field. And they just had to take the calculation of, did we pick the right boogeyman?
Well, they picked a boogeyman with $20 million.
They picked a boogeyman with a lot of money, but I think the thing that did was, I mean, like Eric said, they ran a very good campaign, and I think it was just a winning message. If you look at the campaign that they ran and saying, hey, just do the math, this doesn't work.
They lied about the way that the money would be spent and what would be created.
If they lied about it, then Governor Bullock lied about it because they just took it straight from
we said we're going to tax cigarettes $2. That was, and we're going to use that to pay for a variety of health-related things that are now costing Montanans money because smokers and cigarette makers cost us money in the health problems that they create.
Let's go to let's think about this. After the election, Jeff Essman, former chairman of the Republican Party here in the state, tweeted that he thought the big loser of the night was Governor Bullock. And I'm not sure if I disagree. He came out and cut an ad for Williams, and Williams lost. He came out hard for 185, and 185 lost. He's got to deal with this mess in the legislature. What do you think? Do you think Governor Bullock lose?
Just because you support a candidate and she loses doesn't mean that you're losing. I mean, that is a monumental thing to be able to try to win that congressional seat. again, it was you're up against $20 million. It doesn't matter who you are. If you're Superman, you're still up against a $20 million smear campaign. And frankly, you know, we picked up a few seats in the legislature, so that's good, and it further protects any efforts by the Republicans to override the governor's veto when he makes one. I think all in all, he's still looking pretty good.
But it's a catastrophic night for Steve Bullock. I mean, it's everything he touched failed, more or less.
He was on the
And if
Get
you
Out the
look
Vote for with the Get Out the Vote
Except
tour
for
with Tester for the
Except
last month.
Except for Tester. Well, aside from his stops in Iowa. I think he campaigned for more candidates. I don't know how he did in Iowa. Maybe he had a pretty good night in Iowa for all the candidates he campaigned for out there. But the bottom line is Democrats had a real opportunity in Montana, and they blew it. In 2010, with Barack Obama, his first midterm, you know, we picked up historic majorities in both houses of the House and the Senate. Democrats had the same opportunity to do that here. Obama was at 45% approval rating nationally. Trump was at 43% approval rating nationally. They totally blew their opportunity.
Well,
This is still a Republican state.
That's
If
right.
this were a
And
neutral
that's what-
state, I would agree with Jake. He'd be
Yeah.
right, but it's
Okay.
not.
But I want to ask about 186, which kind of goes to what both of you have been talking about with the Democrats and Republicans. We looked at I-186, of course, is the mining initiative, and I looked at how it did in the counties across the state. It failed in every county except 3 counties, Missoula, Gallatin, and Park County, really close. So in other words, all the rural counties, and a lot of counties, voted this down. Rural counties just got killed. And isn't the real divide in Montana, not just Republican and Democrat, but really urban and rural is the big divide? And that's the reason why Democrats can't win anything and can't control the legislature. They can't win anywhere in rural Montana. Why not? What are they? I mean,
Not rural Montana, but generally in white rural America, Democrats don't do very well. So it's everywhere. And partly it's because of the age gap. The young people are in places like Allen County and Missoula County. They're not in Weebaugh and Wheatland.
Well, but let me ask you this, and either one of you can ask it. If I'm a voter in rural Montana, what do you think Democrats have to offer me?
Yeah, I think that's the problem. Is they don't care about those people, and that's not the issue set that the party in general wants to push right now. Is anything that's relevant to those communities? Actually,
the 100,000 people whose health care Jake's party wants to take away when they try to scuttle Medicaid expansion, a lot of those are actually out in rural East.
But a lot of them are in, I mean, I think
They're
60
predominantly
to 65,000.
The point is, what Democrats talk
urban
about, the things we
counties,
want
so.
to, where we want to help people who are poor or working poor or lower middle class or people who struggle. It is everywhere. It is not just in Missoula and Gallatin. It is in the rural part of the state as well.
So in the MTN MSU poll, and we're at the very end, it looks like we did well in the Senate race, we did well in the House race, we did well in 185 in that we thought it was going to lose. But the one place we didn't get it right, we saw about 51% supporting the mining initiative. Real quick, why did it lose?
We're talking now.
Why are we wrong in the
186.
poll? Why 186? Why?
Democrats were split on it. The unions were against it, and a lot of Democrats didn't support it. And obviously the environmentalists did, but a lot of Democrats did not. And obviously most conservative voters opposed it. So that's really ultimately what it was about.
In terms of why the poll is wrong, I think it's just timing, because the majority of the money on both sides of that initiative was spent
After the
after
poll. That's
your
true.
poll came out.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, it was great unpacking the election. Thanks for joining us on the show. Great time. Thanks for joining us here on Face the State, and we'll see you next time next Sunday. Take care.
You've been watching Face the State, a presentation of MTN, the Montana Television Network.